For section 2-2, our learning objective is to restate and apply the 4 questions necessary to analyze transactions for starting a business into debit and credit parts. So we looked at 3 similar questions for chapter 1 as we did our transactions. Now we have an extra step, and we will learn how to apply those 4 questions to transactions going forward. So it's important to know that this section 2-2, we are going to add a lot more accounts. So in chapter 1, we really just had a few assets, liabilities, and 1 owner's equity account. Now owner's equity, we know that affected 4 different things. That affected when we had investments, withdrawals, expenses, and sales. Well, now we're going to break down those things. So we're going to have a bunch of expenses, and those will all be listed in a chart of accounts. So the more detailed we can be in accounting, the better and more accurate the accounting can be. And people who are looking at these numbers can make decisions a lot easier based on those numbers. So here's a chart of accounts that we'll use going forward for Delgado Web Services. So notice that we have all the expenses over here on the right, instead of just throwing everything into owner's equity. All we had last chapter was Michael Delgado Capital. We put everything in there. Expenses, sales, investments, withdrawals. Now we think of our capital account, that's only where we're going to put our investments. You might guess here we have Michael Delgado Drawing. You might guess that's where we're going to put our withdrawals, which is correct. 1 sales account, and then all these expenses broken out. So anytime you do a transaction, you have to find 2 accounts from this chart of accounts, which is the first blank on our note guide. Each transaction changes at least 2 accounts, and debits must equal credits for each transaction. So that's really important. We talked about the accounting equation being in balance, or assets equaling liabilities and owner's equity. Now we say debits must equal credits. So every time we have a transaction, you're going to select 2 of these accounts. Now we're going to get into our 4 essential questions. Now you should pause this video and fill in these 4 essential questions in your note guide. These questions are really, really important. It's the steps that we're going to take as we go through every single transaction. And at first, we'll have to go step by step. Step 1, which accounts are affected? Step 2, how is each account classified? Well, eventually, it'll just become second nature. You'll start going through those steps without even having to think about it. So get those written down, because that will be a very good guide as we go through the transactions this chapter and every chapter moving forward. So our first transaction here. On your note guide, you're going to answer the questions as we go. So the transaction said we paid cash for supplies, $165. So we're going to go through these 4 questions together. Number 1, it says, the question is, what 2 accounts are affected? Well, supplies and cash are affected. So that's what you'll fill in for question number 1, supplies and cash. Okay, we learned this last chapter. This transaction is no different from chapter 1. Now instead of plus and minus, we're doing debits and credits. That's the only difference. Okay, next question is, how are they classified? How are they classified means, are they an asset, a liability, or owner's equity? Well, we know from chapter 1 that supplies and cash are both assets. Okay, question 3 says, what side is the normal balance? Well, assets increase on the debit side. So we're going to increase our supplies with a debit, and we paid cash. So cash is decreasing. So we're going to decrease cash with a credit. So there we go. Supplies is debited, cash is credited. So those are the 4 steps that we'll go through. We'll go through them in a lot more detail as we go through our work together. The rest of the slides here provide you with more examples so that you can go through those on your own, or you could use them as a reference as you do the work together. But we'll go through them when we go through the work together.